Imagine, if you will, that you are living at the absolute zenith of a civilization that feels eternal. It is the year 1190 BC, and you are walking the bustling, aromatic streets of Ugarit, a glittering jewel on the Mediterranean coast of modern-day Syria. This isn't just a city. It is a global hub, a vibrant port where the known world converges. You see ships with purple sails from Tyre, heavy merchant vessels laden with gold from Egypt, and caravans carrying silver from the mountains of Anatolia. The harbor is a cacophony of languages: Hittite, Akkadian, Egyptian. In the archives, scribes diligently press wedges into wet clay, recording a surprisingly modern, globalized economy. They track grain shipments, copper trades, and diplomatic marriages. The king of Ugarit corresponds with the pharaoh of Egypt as a brother. Civilization, with its complex bureaucracy, its towering temples, and its international trade networks, seems truly indestructible. But time is a cruel fragility. A mere few years later, around 1185 BC, this bustling metropolis would be reduced to silence and ash. In the ruins of the city, archaeologists found a clay tablet, one of the last documents ever written there. It was a letter from Amurapi, the last king of Ugarit, to the king of Wallachia in Cyprus. It is a desperate, haunting plea that echoes across millennia. Asterisk. My father, behold, the enemy's ships came. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hatti, and all my ships are in the land of Lucca? Thus, the country is abandoned to itself. May my father know it. The 7 ships of the enemy that came here inflicted much damage upon us. Asterisk, that message was likely never sent. Or if it was, help never arrived. The ovens where the tablets were being baked were found still full, abandoned in mid-operation. Enemy ships had breached the horizon. Fire consumed the library, the palace, and the people. Ugarit was wiped from the pages of history, never to be inhabited again. And Ugarit's tragic story is far from unique. The vast tapestry of the human journey is heavily stitched with the threads of empires that rose with hubris and civilizations that collapsed in ruin. We often think of the end as a sudden Hollywood-style event, an asteroid, a nuclear blast. But in history, the end was rarely a bolt from the blue. It was a process, often slow, grueling, and heralded by terrible, unmistakable omens. From skies darkening with inexplicable volcanic ash to fertile lands cracking under the weight of decades-long droughts, the signs were there. In hindsight, looking back from the safety of the 21st century, these signs seem as clear as day. But at the time, to the people living through them, they were misinterpreted as temporary setbacks, underestimated as manageable variances, or simply tragically ignored. Today, we will embark on a journey through time to discover how 5 of the ancient world's greatest catastrophes were not just isolated disasters, but the grim harbingers of the end of an era. We will analyze the warnings that went unheeded and the fragile complexities that turned crises into collapses. For 5 great civilizations, this was the beginning of their apocalypse. Our first destination takes us to the shimmering blue waters of the Aegean Sea. Traveling back to roughly 1600 BC, here on the island of Crete, Europe's first truly great civilization was flourishing, the Minoans. This was a culture distinct from anything else in the ancient world. While other empires like the Assyrians or Babylonians celebrated conquest and martial power, Minoan art is shockingly devoid of scenes of warfare. They weren't a people of grim fortresses and conquering armies, but of grand, open, labyrinthine palaces. The most famous being the legendary palace of Knossos. It was a sophisticated society of merchant princes, brilliant artists, and master engineers. Their palaces featured plumbing systems that wouldn't be rivaled for thousands of years, with flushing toilets and complex drainage. Their walls were adorned with vibrant, colorful frescoes depicting leaping dolphins, women in elaborate dresses gathering saffron, and the famous bull leaping ritual, a dangerous, athletic performance where young men and women grasped the horns of charging bulls and vaulted over them. This was a society that celebrated life, nature, and agility. The Minoans were the undisputed masters of the sea, thalassocracy. Their merchant fleet was the engine of the Bronze Age economy, connecting Crete to the mighty markets of Egypt, the Levant, and the Greek islands. They grew rich transporting olive oil, wine, timber, and highly prized purple dye. To any observer standing on the docks of Knossos at that time, the Minoan civilization seemed to be the pinnacle of stability, culture, and prosperity. But disaster was brewing just 110 kilometers to the north. On the island of Thera, known to us today as the picturesque tourist paradise of Santorini, a quiet mountain was waking up. For weeks, perhaps months, the ground trembled. Smoke began to curl from the summit. For the locals living in the sophisticated city of Akrotiri on Thera, it must have been terrifying. But for the powerful lords in Crete, it likely seemed a distant problem, a curiosity, or perhaps a sign of divine displeasure that could be appeased with sacrifices. They could not possibly have imagined the sheer scale of the cataclysm that was about to unfold. That mountain was no ordinary volcano. When it finally unleashed its fury, it exploded with a violence that defies modern comprehension. The Minoan eruption of Thera was a super-colossal event, estimated to be a VEI 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index. To put that in perspective, it was dozens of times more powerful than the Krakatoa eruption of 1883. The explosion was so violent, it literally pulverized the center of the island, creating the iconic, broken crescent-shaped caldera we see today. A column of ash, rock, and superheated gas blasted more than 30 kilometers into the stratosphere. The immediate impact was the total annihilation of Akrotiri on Thera, which was buried under meters of ash, creating a Bronze Age Pompeii that remains impeccably preserved today. But the killing blow for the Minoan civilization on Crete was a secondary effect. As the volcano's magma chamber emptied and collapsed into the sea, it displaced an unimaginable volume of water. A mega tsunami, a wall of water estimated to be tens of meters high, raced outward across the Aegean. It smashed into the northern coast of Crete with the energy of multiple atomic bombs, destroying the ports and the fleet that were the backbone of their power. And the horror didn't stop with the water. The volcanic ash cloud drifted south, blanketing the eastern part of Crete, poisoning water sources and destroying crops, possibly causing a localized volcanic winter. Famine and crisis set in. The Minoan society, weakened and demoralized, became easy prey. The Thera eruption was the blow that initiated a long decline. Archaeological evidence shows that later, around 1375 BC, the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece arrived and occupied the palace of Knossos. The distinct, joyous Minoan culture was slowly absorbed, leaving behind only the legend of an advanced civilization swallowed by the sea, a story that Plato would later immortalize as the myth of Atlantis. The fire and water that triggered the collapse of the Minoans was a spectacular, noisy apocalypse. But nature has other, quieter ways to destroy civilizations. Centuries later, a perfect storm of chaos was gathering that would wipe out nearly the entire civilized world. This time, the enemy wouldn't be a single exploding mountain, but a silent, relentless force that no army could fight and no wall could keep out. Let us move forward in time to the end of the 13th century BC. Roughly 1200 BC, we are now at the height of the late Bronze Age. This is not a primitive world of isolated tribes. It is a cosmopolitan, interconnected international system. At its center stood the mighty Hittite Empire in Anatolia, masters of iron and chariots. To the south ruled the opulent New Kingdom of Egypt, led by celebrity pharaohs like Ramesses II. and across the Aegean lay the Mycenaean kingdoms of Greece, the land of Agamemnon and the heroes who would be mythologized in Homer's Iliad. Trade routes spider-webbed across the Mediterranean, binding these giants together. Copper, tin, gold, and spices moved freely. The famous Amarna letters reveal a diplomatic club of great kings who addressed each other as brother. It was a sophisticated balance of power. That must have felt like it would last forever. But beneath this golden surface, the foundations were rotting. Texts from the era began to speak with increasing panic of a new, mysterious threat: the Sea Peoples, raiders who attacked coastal cities like locusts. For decades, historians blamed these mysterious Vikings of the South for the collapse. But what put so many people in motion at the same time? The answer that modern science is uncovering reveals the true, ignored sign of the apocalypse: dramatic, catastrophic climate change. Detailed studies of ancient fossilized pollen and tree rings from Turkey tell a harrowing story. Starting in the late 13th century BC, the eastern Mediterranean began to suffer from a mega drought event. The rains simply stopped coming for decades. For civilizations built on agriculture, years without rain were a death sentence. The crops withered. Imperial granaries stood empty. Famine spread. An empire cannot sustain armies and bureaucracies without grain. The system began to buckle. As food became scarce, the social contract broke. The survivors of these famines were forced to migrate, becoming those same sea peoples described in texts not as invaders, but as desperate climate refugees. The shockwave shattered the entire international system. The Hittite capital, Hattusa, was burned. The Mycenaean citadels in Greece were destroyed, plunging the region into a dark age. Ugarit sent its last desperate letter before vanishing. Only Egypt managed to repel the invasions, but its power was broken forever. In a span of just 40 years, the interconnected world of the Bronze Age completely fell apart. Showing just how fragile complex systems truly are, the Bronze Age collapse shows how complex societies can disintegrate. But the story of our fragility is much, much older. Thousands of years earlier, a single event nearly wiped us from the face of the earth, leaving a scar in our very DNA. We must now travel back into deep time, to approximately 74,000 years ago. Humanity, Homo sapiens, was a young species of hunter-gatherers. Spread across Africa and beginning to venture into Asia, we were just another promising but vulnerable mammal on the planet. On the island of Sumatra, in Indonesia, a geological monster was waking up. The Toba Supervolcano was about to unleash a super eruption, a Category 8 event, thousands of times more powerful than any in recorded history. When Toba exploded, it ejected so much sulfur and ash into the stratosphere that it blocked the sunlight, plunging the world into a volcanic winter that lasted for years. Global temperatures crashed. For a species dependent on hunting and gathering, the consequences were catastrophic. Plants died, animals starved, and humans were pushed into a terrible corner. This event is the centerpiece of the controversial Toba catastrophe theory. Geneticists noticed a surprising lack of diversity in our DNA, suggesting we went through a genetic bottleneck. The theory proposes that Toba reduced the total human population to perhaps a few thousand individuals. We were on the endangered species list. While debated today, Toba was undoubtedly a transformative trauma. The harsh conditions forced our ancestors to innovate, to develop tighter social networks, and to adapt to a dying world. Toba wasn't the end, but a reminder that our resilience was forged in the fire and ice of one of Earth's greatest disasters. Our ancestors survived Toba. But millennia later, once humans had built empires of stone and marble, they would learn that sometimes the danger comes not from the sky, but from beneath their own feet. We now jump forward to late antiquity, to the year 526 AD. The Western Roman Empire has fallen. But the Byzantine Empire still shines in the east. One of its jewels was Antioch, located in modern-day Turkey. Antioch was a colossal metropolis, the Queen of the East, a center of trade, culture, and early Christianity. But the city possessed a fatal flaw. Antioch sat squarely on top of a complex intersection of major fault lines. Earthquakes were a known reality, but the citizens had grown complacent. No one was prepared for the monster sleeping beneath them. The sign came without warning in late May, during the Festival of the Ascension, when the city was packed with pilgrims. Suddenly, the earth buckled with unimaginable violence. The chronicler John Malalas, a survivor, described how the surface of the earth boiled and buildings were thrown into the air before crashing down. The magnificent churches and crowded tenor blocks collapsed in seconds, burying thousands. The horror didn't stop there. Fires from overturned lamps and kitchen hearths erupted into a firestorm, a rain of fire that consumed what the earthquake had left standing. The death toll was staggering. Malalas reported 250,000 dead. The collapse of Antioch was a psychic blow to the empire and a dark omen of the difficult century to come, proving that even the most pious and wealthy cities can be brought low in a moment. The tragedy of Antioch was a sudden, brutal blow. But there is a special kind of tragedy reserved for disasters that happen in slow motion. What about when the sign is a massive smoking mountain that everyone sees, but no one understands? Our final story takes us to the Bay of Naples in the year 79 AD, to the heart of the Roman Empire. Under the shadow of a seemingly peaceful mountain called Vesuvius, cities like Pompeii and Herculaneum prospered. Life was good, a perfect portrait of the Pax Romana. People lived in the shadow of Vesuvius, but they didn't fear it. To them, it was just a mountain covered in fertile vineyards. It hadn't erupted in centuries. However, the mountain had been trying to warn them. In 62 AD, a massive earthquake devastated the region. The resilient Pompeians didn't see it as a warning, but as an opportunity to rebuild. In the days leading up to the eruption, wells dried up and small tremors became constant. But as Pliny the Younger noted, people weren't alarmed because tremors were frequent in Campania. They normalized the anomaly. Then, on an autumn day in 79 OD, Vesuvius exploded. A colossal column of ash and gas rocketed 30 kilometers into the sky, shaped like a Mediterranean pine tree. First came a rain of pumice that buried the streets. Many fled, but others hid in their homes, hoping the storm would pass. They waited too long. During the night, the column collapsed, sending pyroclastic flows superheated. Avalanches of gas and debris racing down the mountain stopped the heat vaporized soft tissue instantly. In less than 24 hours, Pompeii and Herculaneum were erased from the map, buried under 20 feet of ash. Paradoxically, the disaster preserved them, creating a haunting time capsule of Roman life, the ultimate monument to the danger of ignoring the signs staring you in the face. The stories we've journeyed through today, from Thera to the Bronze Age, from Toba to Antioch and Pompeii, span tens of thousands of years. But they tell us the same truth. No civilization is invincible. Each collapse was announced. Nature provided the warnings. A smoking mountain, decades of drought, the trembling of the ground. The signs were different, but the lesson is the same. These ancient peoples were not stupid. They were complex, organized societies just like us. They suffered from normalcy bias, the belief that because the world has always worked a certain way, it will continue to do so forever. These stories resonate with a frightening urgency today. They force us to ask, what are the signs we are ignoring? The melting ice caps, extreme weather, economic fragility. Are we, like the Romans, so accustomed to the tremors that we no longer recognize the danger? History doesn't predict the future, but it offers powerful warnings. The fall of these great civilizations is a reminder that complexity is not a shield against collapse. Sometimes it is the mechanism of it. Which of these ancient collapses resonated most with you? Was it the sudden silence of the Minoans, the slow grind of the Bronze Age, or the frozen tragedy of Pompeii? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if you want to keep exploring the lost lessons of the past, don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.